Alright, Karina baby, today is the 9th. It's July 9th. It's a day before you are 5 years and 3 months old. So you are, if you are 5 years, 2 months, and 29 days old. Or 30 days old, I'm sorry. So, today's the 9th. A tale of a tale. And look at the spelling of this. A tail, like a tall tail, of a tail. Like a tail that's on, like, pin the tail on the donkey. Can you see it? Okay. Oliver Puppy looked at himself in the mirror one morning. He liked his ears. He thought his nose was wonderful. But when he turned to look at his tail, Oliver Puppy sighed. It was short and thin, hardly a tail at all. It will grow, said his mother. You'll see. Oliver went to see his friends on the farm. First he visited a cow. She had a long, swishy tail. I wish I had a tail like yours, said Oliver. The cow mooed with laughter. My tail is much too long for a puppy, said she. Next Oliver went to see a horse. He was flickering flies away with his thick black tail. I wish I had a tail like yours, said Oliver. The horse neighed with laughter. My tail is much too big for a puppy, he said. So Oliver went to see the chickens. A rooster was strutting around the yard. He was magnificent. His magnificent fluttery tail. I wish I had a tail like yours, said Oliver. The rooster crowed with laughter. Just think what you'd look like with feathers, he said. Oliver felt sad. All his friends had beautiful tails. If only his would grow. Oliver Puppy went home to his mother. She wagged her long tail, her hairy tail, and licked him all over. I wish I had a tail like yours, said Oliver. His mother smiled. You will, she said. Wait and see. From that day on, Oliver Puppy grew bigger and bigger, until one day he looked in the mirror again. He liked his ears. His nose was better than before. And then he turned and looked at his tail. There was the best tail he had ever seen. I told you it would grow, said his mother. It's a fine tail. And just right for me, said Oliver proudly. Look at that. He grew into his own tail. See? Perfect. Alright, let's see what's in the literature book for today. The next one is Cinderella. Cinderella, Cinderella, night and day a Cinderella, wash the dishes, scrub the floors. Right? Cinderella. There was once an honest gentleman who took for his second wife the proudest and most desirable lady in the whole country. She had 2 daughters exactly like herself. He himself had a little girl who resembled her dead mother, the best woman in all the world. Secretly had the second marriage taken place before the stepmother became jealous of the good qualities of the little girl, who was so great and courteous to her own 2 daughters. She gave her all the hard work of the house, compelling her to wash the floors and staircases and dust the bedrooms and clean the gates and the grates. Well, her sisters occupied carpeted chambers hung with mirrors where they could see themselves from head to foot. The poor little girl was sent to sleep in an attic on an old straw mattress, with only one chair and not a looking glass in the room. She suffered all in silence, not daring to complain to her father, who was entirely ruled by his new wife. When her daily work was done, she used to sit down in the chimney corner among the ashes, from which the two sisters gave her the nickname Cinderella. But Cinderella, however shabbily clad, was handsomer than they were, with all their fine clothes. It happened that the king's son gave a series of balls, to which were invited all the ranks and fashions of the city, and among the rest of the two elder sisters. They were very proud and happy, and occupied their whole time in disclaiming what they should wear. This was a source of new trouble to Cinderella, whose duty it was to get up their fine linen and lace, and who never could please them, however much she tried. They talked of nothing but their clothes. "I," said the elder, "shall wear my velvet gown and my trimmings of English lace." "And I," added the younger, "will have but my ordinary silk petticoat, but I shall adorn it with an upper skirt of flowered brocade, of flowered brocade, and shall put on my diamond tiara, which is a great deal finer than anything of yours." Here the elder sister grew angry, and then a dispute began to run so high that Cinderella, who was known to have excellent taste, who called upon to decide between them. She gave them the best advice she could, and offered to dress them herself, and especially to arrange their hair, an accomplishment in which she excelled many a noted coiffeur. The important evening came, and she exercised all her skill in adorning the young ladies. While she was combing out the elder's hair, this ill-natured girl said sharply, "Cinderella, do you not wish you were going to the ball?" "Oh." "Ah, madam," they obliged her always to say madam, "you are only mocking me. It is not my fortune to have any such pleasure." "You are right, people would only laugh to see little Cinder wench at the ball." After this, any other girl would have dressed the hair all awry, but Cinderella was good, and made it perfectly even and smooth. The sisters had secretly eaten for 2 days, and had broken a dozen stray lace a day in trying to make themselves slender. But tonight they broke a dozen more, and lost their tempers over and over again, before they had completed their toiletries. When at last the happy moment arrived, Cinderella followed them to the coach, and after it was whirled them away, she sat down by the kitchen fire and cried. Immediately her godmother, who was a fairy, appeared beside her. "What are you crying for, my little maid?" "Oh, I wish," her sobs stopped her. "You wish to go to the ball, isn't it so?" Cinderella nodded. "Well, then, be a good girl, and you shall go. First, run into the garden and fetch me the largest pumpkin you can find." Cinderella did not understand what this had to do with her getting to the ball, but being obedient and obliging, she went. Her godmother took the pumpkin, and having scooped out all of its insides, struck it with her wand, and then became a splendid gallant coach, lined with rose-colored stain. Now fetch me a mouse trap with one of the pantry out of the pantry, my dear. Cinderella brought it, and contained 6 of the fattest, sleekest mice. The fairy lifted up the wire door, and each mouse ran out. She struck it and changed it into a beautiful black horse. But what shall I do for your coachman, Cinderella? Cinderella shrugged that she hadn't seen a large black rat in a rat trap, and had might do for want of better. You are right, go and look for him. He was found, and the fairy made him into the most respectable coachman, with all the finest whiskers imaginable. She afterwards took 6 lizards from behind the pumpkin frame, and changed them into 6 footmen, all in splendid livery, who imaginarily jumped up behind the carriage, and if they had been footmen all their days, as if they had been footmen all their days. Well, Cinderella, now you can go to the ball. What, in these clothes? Said Cinderella. Precisely, looking down at her ragged flock. Her godmother laughed and touched her also with the wand, at which her wretched threadbare jacket became stiff with gold and sparkled with jewels. Her woolen petticoat lengthened down into a gown of swooping satin, and underneath which peeped out of her little feet covered with silk stockings and the prettiest glass slippers in the whole world. Now, Cinderella, you may go. But remember, if you stay 1 instant after midnight, your carriage will become a pumpkin, your coachman a rat, your horses mice, and your footmen lizards. Well, yourself will be a little cinder witch you were an hour ago. Cinderella promised without fear. Her heart was full of joy. Arrived at the palace with the king's son, whom someone, probably the fairy, had told to await the coming of an uninvited princess whom nobody knew, was standing at the entrance ready to receive her. He offered her his hand and led her with the utmost courtesy through the assemblance gate, who stood aside to let her pass, whispering to one another, "Oh, how beautiful she is! It might have been turned, how beautiful she is! It might have turned the heads of anyone but poor Cinderella, who was so used to being despised, but she took it all as if she were something happening in a dream. Her triumph was complete. Even an old king said to the queen they'd never seen Her Majesty's young days had seemed so charming a person. All the court ladies scattered and scanned her eagerly, her clothes, and all of the determined to have theirs made the next day of exactly the same pattern. The king's son himself led her out to dance, and she danced so gracefully that he admired her more and more. Indeed, at supper, which was fortunately early, his admiration quite took away his appetite. Cinderella herself sought out her sisters, placed herself beside them, and offered them all sorts of civil attentions. Those coming as though supposed from a stranger, and so magnificent a lady, almost overwhelmed them with delight. While she was talking with them, she heard the clock strike 11:45. And making a conscious abode to the royal family, she re-entered her carriage, escorted gallantly by the king's son, and arrived in safety to her own door. There she found her godmother, who smiled approval, and of whom she begged permission to go for the second ball the following night, to which the queen had invited her. While she was talking to the 2 sisters, were heard knocking at the gate, and the fairy godmother vanished, leaving Cinderella sitting at the chimney corner, rubbing her eyes and pretending to be very sleepy. "Ah," cried the oldest sister spitefully. "It has been the most delightful ball, and there was presence of the most beautiful princess I ever saw, who was so extremely polite to both of us." "Was she?" said Cinderella indifferently. "And who might she be? Nobody knows, though everybody would give their eyes to know, especially the king's son." "Indeed," replied Cinderella, a little more interested. "I said, oh, I should like to see her." Then she turned to the elder sister and said, most jubilee, "Will you not let me go tomorrow and lead me in your yellow gown that you wear on Sundays?" "That laid yellow gown to Cinderich, I am not so mad as that." At which refusal Cinderella did not complain, for it was her sister really had lent her the gown. She would have been considerably embraced. The next night came, and the two young ladies, richly dressed in different toiletries, went to the balls. Cinderella, more splendidly attired and more beautiful than ever, followed them shortly after. Now remember, 12 o'clock was her godmother's parting speech, and she thought she certainly should, but the prince's attention to her were greater even than the first evening, and in the delight of listening to his pleasant conversation, time slipped by unperceived. While she was sitting beside him in the lovely alcove and looking at the moon from under the border of orange blossoms, she heard a clock strike the first stroke of 12. She started up and fled away as lightly as a deer. Amazed, the prince followed but could not catch her. Indeed, he missed his lovely princess altogether, and only saw running out of the palace doors a little dirty lass who had never beheld before, and of whom he certainly would never have taken the least notice. Cinderella arrived at home breathless and weary, ragged and cold, without the carriage or footman or coachman. The only remnant of her past magnificence being one of the little glass slippers. The other she had dropped in the ballroom as she ran away. When the two sisters returned, they were full of this strange adventure, how the beautiful lady had appeared at the ball, more beautiful than ever, and enchanted everyone who looked at her, and how at the clock was striking 12, she had suddenly risen up and fled through the ballroom, disappearing no one knew how or where, and dropping one of the glass slippers behind her in her flight. The king's son had remained inconsolable until he chanced to pick up the little glass slipper, which he carried away in his pocket, and was seen to take it out continuously and look at it affectionately, with the air of a man very much so in love. In fact, from his behavior during the remainder of the evening, all the court and the royal family were sure that he was desperately in love with the wearer of this little glass slipper. Cinderella listened in silence, turning her face to the kitchen fire, and perhaps it was that which made her look so rosy, but nobody even ever noticed or admired her at home, so it did not signify. The next morning she went to her weary work again, just as before. A few days after, the whole city was attended by the sight of a herald going round with a little glass slipper in his hand, publishing with the flourish of trumpets, that the king's son ordered this to be fitted on the foot of every lady in the kingdom. and that he wished to marry the lady whom it fitted best, or to whom it and fellow slippers belonged. Princesses, duchess, courtiers, and simple gentlemen all tried it on, but being a fairy slipper, it fitted nobody, and besides, nobody could produce its fellow slipper, which lay all the time safely in the pocket of Cinderella's old woolen gown. At last the herald came to the house of the two sisters, and thought they well known neither of themselves was the beautiful lady, and made every attempt to get their clumsy feet into the glass slipper, but in vain. "Let me try it on," said Cinderella from the chimney corner. "What, you?" cried the other, bursting into shouts of laughter, but Cinderella only smiled and held out her hand. Her sisters could not prevent her, since the command was that every maiden in the city should try on the slipper, in order that no chance might be left untried. For the prince was nearly breaking his heart, and his father and mother were afraid that, though a prince, he would actually die from the love of the beautiful unknown lady. So the herald bade Cinderella to sit down on the three-legged stool in the kitchen, and he himself put the slipper on her pretty little foot. It fitted exactly. She then drew from her pocket the fellow slipper, which she also put on, and stood up. With the touch of the magic shoe, and all her dress changed likewise. No longer was she wearing the poor disposed cinder witch, but the beautiful lady whom the king's son loved. Her sister recognized her at once, filled with astonishment, mingled with no little alarm. They threw themselves at her feet, begging her pardon for all their former unkindness. She raised and embraced them, telling them she forgave them with all of her heart, and only hoped that they would love her always. Then she departed with the herald of the king to the king's palace, and told her whole story to his majesty and the royal family. They were not in the least surprised, for everybody believed the fairies, and everybody longed to have a fairy godmother. As for the young prince, he found her more lovely and lovable than ever, and insisted upon marrying her immediately. Cinderella never went home again, and she sent for her two sisters to the palace, and married them shortly after to two rich gentlemen of the court. Back then, baby, you got to have an arranged marriage a lot of the times, and women were used as property in order to settle differences between one county and another, or one kingdom and another, right? People were very much so seen as, well, it's still the same way today. Like, Mama was with Papa for 13 years, right? And Mama loves Papa very much, and since Mama and Papa got married in 2012 with an agreement, that means that Mama obeys Papa and is obedient and obliging, just like Cinderella is. And that's the story of Cinderella, right? You kind of are still property. You really got to think about what you want to do in life. Don't obey yourself into a ditch, though. But that's my stories for today. Today is the 9th. I'm going to go back and I missed a few days because I fell asleep last night and I was doing things. A lot of things are caught up on. And I was out the other day and I got you adventure stories that we're going to be doing. And I want to do the rest of Aesop's Fables today. Alright, I love you so very much. I'll be right back. Let's do Baker Tove since it's still daytime. Baker Tove, good morning. We sing Baker Tove, we thank you for this life. We sing Baker Tove each morning. This way we know it will be alright. Alright, our life cycle is about this big on a timeline, right? It's little. It's not very big. We're about this much even on a huge timeline of being alive as a species of a human being. Our lives are short. But you know what? You matter, baby. You are the most important person in my entire world. I miss you and I love you and I think about you every second of the day. There's no way. I love you. I love you so incredibly much. Alright. I'll be right back.